Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Alpha Kappa Alpha Epsilon Epsilon Omega chapter for our webinar, State and Local Elections. Your elections count. Each and every election counts. This evening, first of all, we would like to start by thanking Ms. Desiree McMillian for the music, compliments of the Harlem Renaissance to get us in the mood. A few housekeeping ideas to start. Thank you to our co-sponsor, the League of Women Voters, our co-sponsors and supporters, Divine Nine Chapters, the NAACP, National League of Negro Women, Solidarity Sundays, and Bend the Arc Jewish Action and CU. If you have any questions throughout this webinar, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, if you could enter those questions in the Q&A section. Towards the end of our webinar, we will address all of the questions and provide answers. If we cannot provide an answer this evening, we will take your information and be sure to get back to you. To keep everyone actively engaged throughout this webinar, we will ask a series of poll questions. I will read the question and they will pop on your screen. If you are joining us via Facebook Live, feel free to answer the question in the live stream. If not, if you are in the webinar, please answer the poll on your screen. We are going to get started with our first poll question, just to make sure everybody is ready and attentive. Which issue is your top priority in the 2022 midterm elections? Please select. Ms. Desiree, once we have an ample amount of answers, please let me know and we can display the responses on the screen, please. Thank you so much. So we have 21%, a tie for 21% of community and social service resources are a top priority in the 2022 midterm elections, and something else is 21%. We also have at the top at 26%, neighborhood safety. If anyone would like to share in the chat in the chat what your something else is, we could definitely discuss that later or in the Q&A if you would like to. But without further ado, we are going to go into our session and our program for this evening. Thank you for participating in the first poll. I would like to introduce our very first speaker, Mr. Kaleb Johnson, a high school senior at Centennial High School and a first-time voter in the 2022 election. Mr. Kaleb Johnson, if you could please turn on your screen. Thank you, sir. The floor is yours.
Good evening. My name is Kaleb P. Johnson, and I'm a senior at Centennial High School. Recently, I just turned 18 years old. With this being said, I am now a registered voter. With this, I believe that voting is important because of the fact that it gives you a voice as it relates to the decision-making in our country, as well as our community. As I have taken the time to ponder over the history of voting, I've gained understanding of the fact that the voices of the Black and Brown communities were consistently taken away. Laws and regulations were put in place to prohibit us from using our voices to express the opinions we share on the things that happen in society. Regulations like literacy tests, having to memorize parts of the Constitution, and poll taxes, to be exact, were some of the laws that were put in place to disenfranchise the voices of particular groups. 400 plus years later, there are still forms of voter suppression that continues to surge across the country. As quoted by many different individuals in the African American community, when white America sneezes, Black folks get pneumonia. With there being little to no representation of ethnicity in relation to politics, every time decisions are made by people who hold certain positions, Black and Brown communities suffer from these decisions. Coming to this realization has pushed me to ensure that my voice as a citizen is heard. I also take great joy in knowing that my voice will matter in society. I plan to vote for individuals whose beliefs, views, and/or opinions correlate with mine. Having this opportunity, especially as an African American male whose voice has had a history of being oppressed by the system, will allow me the freedom to indirectly acknowledge certain things that take place in the United States. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kaleb Johnson, for your well-spoken words. We do appreciate it, and we look forward to the bright things you will do in our future to come. Our next speaker will be Miss Michaela Anderson, a junior at Millikan University, who is majoring in exercise science. Miss Anderson.
Hello, yeah, my name is Michaela, and my focus is on local voting. So just generally about voting, it's our way of speaking in our government. And so like people don't really take consideration of how important their voice is. And that's really what I wanna address. So like candidates, they share their opinions and their beliefs and what changes they wanna implement in our government and our society. And as citizens, we try to align with those candidates based on our personal values and our beliefs. And that's how we're using our voice, is aligning with those candidates. And that's why we elect those people. So that's why our voice and our vote matters. So speaking specifically on voting locally, we don't really think about local as important as state and federal levels. But locally, that's where the change really happens, because it's easier to make change. It's on a smaller scale. There's fewer people, and there are the people that are in those positions, they live in that community, they live in our communities, and therefore like the change that happens in that community matters to them too, and their families and things like that. So we can relate to them more. And like I said, it's a smaller scale, so more change can happen. And depending on what we want to like change, it can happen faster because more people like in our community can get involved. And just like locally, that change affects us directly. Whereas like state and federal, like it affects everybody, but all the changes that happen locally, that really does affect our daily lives. And that's like schools, housing, our safety, and like our first responders, our health, parks and recreation, our streets, just anything that really does impact our lives. And as citizens and as voters, that's where we do have the most control, because we're picking people in our community to represent us. And we can also be a part of that change too as individuals. So going forward in November, we have general elections. So be looking for those offices that are open in November, and doing your research about those candidates, and in future years. So next year and future years, what is open then too. But that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Anderson. We appreciate that. And thank you so much for stressing the importance of local elections. Our next speaker will be Ms. Erin Miner, a junior at the University of Illinois, majoring in political science. Ms. Miner.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Miner. I'm a student at the U of I. Thank you so much for having me. So I'd just like to talk a little bit about why I vote local and what that means to me. I vote local because change is much easier to make happen on a smaller level. Of course, we all want to participate in the big publicized national elections, but at the end of the day, like Michaela was saying before, my vote and your vote count much more in local elections. Big changes start small, and it's important that we take care of those in our community by participating in municipal elections. I'd like to share with you an example of the importance of local elections that I recently read about for class. In 2008, Arizona passed a clean energy bill to encourage and incentivize people to install solar energy in their homes and businesses. It was initially very successful, but it left opponents of clean energy like private utility companies who were losing money on solar customers looking for ways to get around it. The commission in charge of regulation of private utility companies and enforcing this policy were people elected at a local level. However, because this position was a local position that many voters didn't understand the importance of, it was very easy for the private utility companies to spend money on campaign contributions in the next election to put people who would side with them on the commission. This power that they had over the commission resulted in clean energy policy being rolled back and a loss of funding and solar energy sources in the state. Now, Illinois' regulatory commission is not elected, but rather appointed by the governor. That being said, this doesn't mean that there aren't little-known positions in Illinois local and state elections that have more importance than we know. Every local and municipal election has importance in a different area, and some of those areas you may feel very passionate about. Leaders in local governments are much more accessible and responsive to what their constituents have to say than our leaders at a federal level. They are community members just like us and generally tend to care what we think. It's their community too, and they want the best for it, just like us. Local leaders have the power to make changes that impact our daily lives and are the best place to start to implement changes you want to see in the community that you spend every day in. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Ms. Miner. We do appreciate it. And thank you for your great, passionate advice on the importance of and the power of your local elections. Our next speaker will be Ms. Ruth Wing from the League of Women Voters, speaking about the importance of the county board. Ms. Wing.
How does my vote for the county board make a difference in local elections? The county board is responsible for making many decisions that affect our daily lives, and county government is complicated. If you live in a city or town, you get law enforcement, fire protection, sewage, and many other services through your municipal government and pay for those services with your local taxes. If you live outside the boundaries of a city or town, the services you get are provided by the county and paid for by the taxes that the county collects. All of us use county highways and bridges, which are built by and maintained by the county. The county is divided into 11 districts based on population, each with 2 elected representatives. These districts are redrawn every 10 years, and this year is one of those years. This year, all the seats on the county board are up for election, as is the county executive. The county executive also has another important job. The county executive, with the approval of the county board, makes appointments to several boards that govern the expenditures of our tax dollars. These include the Transit Board, the Board of Health, the Disabilities Board, the Housing Authority, and the Mental Health Board. I was a member of the Forest Preserve Board of Commissioners for 10 years after having applied for the position and been appointed by the county board. I quickly learned that as a board, we had responsibility for spending $6 million of taxpayers' money and the stewardship of 4,000 acres of property. The county board has an enormous responsibility in making these appointments, which I know that they take seriously. As voters, we have an equally important responsibility to be informed about the candidates who are running for the county board and county executive positions. The decisions that they make affect our daily lives, as well as the health and well-being of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Wing. We appreciate that information about the local county board. Our next speaker will be Mr. Jamal Matuka from Central High School and a local entrepreneur. Mr. Matuka.
Thank you for having me. I apologize in advance if I start screaming. I'm an ex-coach and I do get kind of loud. But let me start with this. There were 330 million people living in America based on the last census. 42 million of those people are African American. 12.7 million people live in Illinois. 91,000 live in Champaign. 16,800 Champaign residents are African American. What is my point? In our most recent municipal election, board district members won their seat, receiving less than 7,000 votes. I repeat, there are 16,800 African-American Champaign residents, and the winner of district board seats won, receiving less than 7,000 votes. If the African-American community understood its power as a voting bloc, monumental change could instantly be forwarded. On Monday night, March 21st, 2021, Evanston, Illinois became the first city in the country to approve reparations for Black residents who suffered from the practices of racial discrimination stemming from slavery and the era of segregation. The president didn't decree reparations. The United States Senate nor the House of Representatives neither passed legislation forwarding reparations. By an 8-1 vote, the Evanston City Council approved the first phase of a 10-year, $10 million commitment toward the restitution for Black residents who suffered from discriminatory housing practices in the city of Evanston between 1919 and 1969. Alderman Cicely Fleming, the only dissenting voice on the council, slammed the program as not going far enough, calling it a housing plan dressed up as reparations. I applaud the elected board of the Evanston City Council. I salute the people of Evanston that elected such a forward-thinking council. Why are we waiting on the federal government for transformational policy when it's the local government that matters? In Champaign, we have district representatives. In Urbana, there are aldermen. Two of the most prestigious positions in local government are mayor and manager. Cities are really run by city managers who are hired or appointed by city mayors or city councils. City mayors are elected to represent the voters. Both city mayors and managers work toward the goal of providing local government services while safeguarding taxpayers' dollars and maintaining a policy of transparency. The powers of city government are distributed amongst 3 separate branches, similar to the federal government: legislative, executive, and judicial. Legislative branch is the city council, the elected district representatives. The judicial branch is the municipal court. The executive branch is the mayor and the manager. The legislative branch, the city council, enacts laws and policies consistent with state law regulating local and municipal affairs. You want change, it's the city council where change in Champaign and Urbana is made, not in the federal government, not the president and the state senators, though they matter. When we talk about day-to-day operations, it's our city council that matters. Local elections matter. Local elections matter so much, rampant voter suppression is the order of the day. Deck stacking strategies are prevalent. What are deck stacking strategies? Purging voter rolls, voter ID laws, felony voter restrictions, pandemic pandering, not to mention outright fraud and claims of election rigging. If you don't understand why voting locally matters so much, please believe others do. Vote local. Allow me to leave you with this. What does your city council do? What are they responsible for? Your city council enacts a city budget, defines the powers, functions, and duties of city officers and employees, fixes the compensation of officers and employees, establishes the working conditions of officers and employees, maintains retirement and pension systems, imposes fines and penalties for violations of city ordinances, enters into contracts, regulates the acquisition, sale, ownership, and other disposition of real property, provides governmental, recreation, educational, cultural, and social services, imposes taxes and as authorized by the state law, causes the city to own and operate different utilities, approves claims against the city, grants franchises for the use of public ways, grants licenses for the purpose of revenue and regulation, and most any type of business. Voting matters. Local elections matter. Vote local. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Matuka, for those powerful, passionate words. We do appreciate it. And I do not think you were speaking too loud at all. You were speaking from the heart, and we appreciate that. Our final speaker will be Ms. Jenell Hardy. Hardy, a member of the exquisite, exceptional, and outstanding chapter of Epsilon Epsilon Omega. She is going to talk about the importance of voting for the county sheriff. Ms. Hardy.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I remember when my dear sorority sister, Muriel Jones, asked if I would be one of the speakers just to talk about things that we had in a conversation earlier that week over lunch while planning our committee activities for the year. Of course, my natural response was, what did I say? You want me to talk about what? In that conversation, I shared stories of my childhood growing up in Chicago, spending my days out from school with my grandfather. He was retired from the IRS, so usually he was free during the day, and I'm sure he was also free. My grandfather had a car, yet we walked from the house to a local restaurant, the Queen of the Sea, and we took the CTA back. I didn't like it, but to be honest, I realized now he was teaching me about my neighborhood. He was an accountant by trade, the first treasurer of our church. And as I mentioned, he worked for the IRS, so he made sure we knew how to count change back before we even got it. Some of my days out, he would have to go politic. And we would go to a place called CBUC, Chicago Black United Communities, a local community organization that was founded by Lou Palmer, or the Rainbow Push Coalition founded by the Reverend Jesse Jackson. I was an impatient little girl and didn't want to hear adults talk about politics all day, but my grandfather spent that time getting information, and then he'd disseminate that information and bring it back to the people in the community. And of course, I had to go along. He advocated for people to register to vote and saw that they made it to the polls with little to no barriers. And when he went to the polls to vote, yes, he made sure that I went with him. Now I have a 13-year-old son, and on election day, he's always with me at the polls for every election. So in thinking about our topic tonight and discussing the importance of state and local elections, I do want to highlight one office in Champaign County that will be on your ballot this year, the Champaign County Sheriff. Yes, this is an elected position. The Champaign County Sheriff's Office provides primary law enforcement service for approximately 50,000 residents in the unincorporated areas of Champaign County. They also assist other municipalities who may or may not have their own law enforcement agencies. The Sheriff's Office is also responsible for the oversight of 2 correctional facilities, providing court security at the Champaign County Courthouse, and overseeing the emergency management within the county. When you look at the job description for this position, for this elected position, some of those duties include developing sheriff's procedures to serve as a guidance for proper conduct of the patrol division activities based on legal information and law enforcement experience. They also serve as the warden of the Champaign County Jail. They're responsible for care and custody of prisoners. They establish the policies and procedures under state statute for the operation of the county jail, and then they monitor the operations. They are responsible for initiating investigations of civilian complaints against sheriff members, and then they determine whether or not action should be taken based on the evidence secured. They're also responsible for the firearms training and operational readiness of those in the sheriff department. So your vote really does matter in determining the person that will hold that office and other local offices, and whether or not the decisions in the role that they play in that office are reflective of the true people that they represent, the constituents of Champaign County.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hardy, for sharing with us your precious childhood memories that have impacted the woman you are today. We would like to thank all of our guest speakers, Mr. Kaleb Johnson, Ms. Michaela Anderson, Ms. Erin Miner, Ms. Ruth Ween, Mr. Jamal Matuka, and Ms. Jenell Hardy. Thank you so much for sharing your stories and the importance of our local and state elections. We are going to have a poll just to make sure that everyone is still with us and to see how much you were paying attention to our very well-spoken and intelligent speakers. Our next poll question is, what percentage of people exercise their right to vote in state and local county midterm elections? So we have 96% of our participants answer this question correctly. Thank you so much. Less than 50%, sadly, less than 50% of people exercise their right to vote in state and local, state and county midterm elections. And that is the purpose of tonight's webinar, to make sure that we increase that number. We are going to move on to, which ties directly into this question, a video about voter apathy.
In the 2016 presidential election, the majority.
Oh my God.
In the 2016 presidential election, the majority of the voting population cast their vote for no one. Nearly half of the population in the United States does not exercise the right to vote. And in the midterm elections, it's even worse. With so many people left out of the conversation, our country does not feel like a democracy. Voter apathy is a problem concentrating a decision-making process that affects hundreds of millions of lives into the hands of relatively few individuals. The presidential election is one of the biggest draws to get people to vote, but it's also one of the biggest reasons that a vote feels like it doesn't matter. Campaigns and media coverage pour ever-increasing amounts of money into the race, but factors like the Electoral College, unsatisfying candidates, and the massive ratio of one vote compared to millions lead to feelings of frustration and powerlessness in many Americans. There are many people who feel disenfranchised to the point where not voting feels like an act of defiance against the system. But this is not good praxis. It is an abdication of power. The votes of others are cast regardless, shaping the political landscape sometimes for generations to come. As Eric Liu, writer and co-founder of Citizens University, puts it, not voting is voting for everything that you may detest and oppose. Not voting can be dressed up as an act of principled, passive resistance. But in fact, not voting is actively handing power over to those whose interests are counter to your own, and to those who would be very glad to take advantage of your absence. Not voting is for suckers. Regardless of the presidency, one of the particular problems with this disengagement is the impact on statewide and local elections. A single vote for president is a small tally compared to every other vote in the nation. But statewide and local positions, as well as initiatives, referendums, and propositions, are swayed by fewer and fewer people. These elections are much easier to influence with your vote, but also more easily threatened by funding from special interests. And the margins can be very close. In the 2018 election alone, there were 105 races that were decided by less than 100 votes. While there are some candidates that seem like they wouldn't stand a chance in a national election, they could often find the votes in your local area. And winning a local election can win the clout needed to succeed in larger elections. That is how Bernie Sanders' political career took off. After a few failed runs for both the Senate seat and governor of Vermont, Sanders ran for mayor of Burlington and won by a margin of 10 votes. He has since won larger elections, becoming a congressman, senator, and very nearly winning the Democratic Party nomination for president twice. So what can you do? First, make sure you are registered to vote. Do this as soon as possible, before any deadlines in your state. If you are already registered, double check your status and make sure your registration hasn't been undermined by a voter roll purge. Next, make sure your friends and family are also registered to vote. The biggest motivator to get people to vote won't come from an argument or a political advertisement, but with encouragement from friends and family. Voting early is important, especially with everything going on in 2020. Voting by mail promotes a huge increase in voter turnout, but not all states do this automatically. So request an absentee ballot to vote by mail, or look for early voting options within your state. If you're mailing in your ballot, do so as soon as possible, or use a ballot drop box if those are available in your state. Early tallied votes make it harder to manipulate. And when you cast your vote, be sure to cover everything down ballot influencing your political landscape as much as possible. Changing the political landscape of a representative democracy can be a difficult, frustrating process, but it can make such a huge difference in the conditions of so many lives. It remains worth the effort. Voting will not fix everything. Changing the world for the better requires activism on many fronts, including getting involved more directly in politics, creating your own media content, or direct action like protests, strikes, and mutual aid. However, even if it is but a small part of the praxis required to better our society, the act of voting remains important. Your vote remains a critical aspect of your voice being heard within a democratic society, and that agency should never be surrendered to others. Thank you for watching our first video. Please like and subscribe for more Praxis U content, and feel free to leave a comment suggesting any future content you would like to see. And remember, don't forget to vote.
Thank you so much, Ms. Desiree, for showing that video. Please remember, participants, that not voting is handing over your power, and we most certainly do not want to hand over our power to people who are going against the things that we believe in that our speakers spoke so eloquently about. It's time for another poll. To make sure that you are all ready to vote, let's see if you know when the 2022 primary election will be. So 60% of our participants did get the question right. June 28th was when the primary elections will be held. If you did not get the answer correct, that is okay. Please mark your calendars now because we want to make sure that you all know that your vote is your voice. So please mark June 28th on your calendars for the primary elections. Next up, we will have an interview about the changes in voting procedures with Ms. Muriel Jones and Ms. Ann Preslin. Ladies, if you will join us, please.
Good evening. So thank you again for joining us this evening. My name is Muriel Jones, and I'll be interviewing I call her my partner in crime. And so there have been a lot of changes to the election procedures, and we just kind of want to make sure that everyone is aware of what's going on. So as I said, I'm Muriel Jones.
And I'm Ann Preslin with the League of Women Voters. Muriel and I live right around the corner from each other, and that's how we got together to work together on how to improve voter turnout in Champaign-Urbana and Champaign County.
So as we gear up for this new election cycle, let's start with I was so glad to see that a lot of the people know when the primary is going to be, because we know we normally have primaries in March and April. So I'm glad that we have an informed electorate on our webinar tonight. But let's talk about the primary. Why was the date moved to June 28th? And is this a permanent move?
The date was changed from the usual March or April to June 28th, primarily because of the 2020 census. As you probably remember, the data from the census was delayed. So it took a while for states to get the data they need to redraw district boundaries. In Illinois, there were preliminary districts created earlier, but the decision was to wait and make sure based on final state data. In addition, there were a series of lawsuits that took place, and that took time as well. So everything kind of got delayed, and that puts us in the position of a primary on June 28th, which is great for voters because we're not likely to have to vote in the snow and ice. This is only for this year. the legislature will need to act on a future schedule. Even though the primary date has changed, the date of the midterm general election is still on November 8th. The only change to that date is that it will now be a state and school holiday.
Excellent. So who can vote in the primary election?
I'm glad you asked that because different states do things differently. And we often hear things on social media or elsewhere and think that it applies to Illinois as well. It may or may not. In Illinois, all eligible voters can vote in the primary election. You can vote by mail, you can vote early, you can register and vote on the same day. And of course, you can vote on primary day, June 28th. Illinois voters do not have to be members of a political party in order to vote in the primary. However, as you know, when you voted in person, you need to choose one party's ballot. So you must vote, you must choose either the Democratic Party ballot and vote for the candidates there, or the Republican Party ballot and vote for the candidates on that side. Why is that? Because the purpose of the primary is to decide which party's candidates are going to move forward into the general election in November. And on your ballot, you will see only contested races, races where there are two or more candidates. So please remember, every eligible voter can vote in our primary.
So we know we're not going to vote for the president. And we know, last year we voted for our mayors. And so we know they're not on the ballot. Some of our speakers earlier today talked about the county board. We heard about the sheriff. But what other offices are up for election this year?
I just want to reflect back for a minute on the kinds of things that our speakers said, and also what we learned from our very first poll about the issues that are important to the people participating with us this evening. This is your opportunity to affect all of those issues that were important to you, because it's your opportunity to make decisions about who becomes our state and county leaders. So I think several of our speakers talked about the importance of making our voices count in elections that directly affect our lives. The ballot you're going to see in the primary and the general election will do just that, particularly on a state and county level. Muriel, as you mentioned, the president is not on the ballot. There is one U.S. senator's seat on the ballot currently held by Senator Duckworth. All U.S. representatives will also be on the ballot, as they all are, plus every single one of our elected state officials. So if you're concerned about the state budget and how state monies are allocated, you have an opportunity to make your issues felt by the way you vote in state elections. Interesting this year, because of the redrawn districts, every single one of our state senators will also be on the ballot. Normally, it's a staggered ballot where only about a third are up for election at any one time. This year, it's all of them. As one of our speakers mentioned, the county executive will be on the ballot, as will all county board members, and those represent you and me regardless of where we live in the county, and also most county officials, the county clerk, the auditor, the treasurer, and the sheriff. There will also be judicial elections and some offices outside in the county in the unincorporated areas. It will be a big ballot, but here's your opportunity to vote the entire ballot, because every single office on there affects our daily lives.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot on the ballot. And so, and hopefully this is our first in this series in terms of encouraging people to get out there and vote in November, first in June, so there's a lot riding on it. And so, as we said, it's not presidential, but it's just as important, if not more important, in terms of our local entities. So,
absolutely.
So what's happening with voting by mail? You know, we've heard a lot about, you know, and we know in Texas right now, they're going through craziness in terms of voting by mail, you know, in terms of ballots being rejected and things like that. You know, I know we had the drop boxes, but then we couldn't use the drop boxes at the last time. So talk to us a little about what's happening with voting by mail and to kind of let people know what the procedures will be.
You know, I had never voted by mail before until the last about a year. I had always voted in person. But with COVID, I decided to see what voting by mail was like. It really works. It's the very same ballot that you get when you go in person to the polls. It comes to your home. You can do all the research you want. You've got the ballot right in front of you. And yes, Muriel, drop boxes are back. They were reinstituted in the changes to the election code last year. So if you vote by mail, if you choose to, you can either put your ballot in the Postal Service, or you can use one of the permanent, safe drop boxes that are located around the county. The election code also has been expanded. This is part of Illinois' effort to really focus on expanding the freedom we all have to vote and the ways we have to vote. Everybody could always vote by mail, but before 2020, somewhere between 9 and 11% of voters voted by mail. In 2020, that went up to almost 30%. And it may stay up there as people have found how easy it is. Again, it's an option for you, and certainly you're welcome to vote in person early or on election day. But this year, you're going to have two choices to vote by mail. You can do it the way we always have, which is you request a mail ballot for any election in which you want to vote by mail. Or you can get yourself on a permanent vote by mail list. What that means is you only have to request a mail ballot once. From then on, you will always receive a mail ballot until you move, until you take yourself off the list, or until you unfortunately die and are removed from the polls. So you're going to have a couple of options to vote by mail if that is your choice. So there was a significant change to the procedures for voting by mail starting this year.
Excellent. So we know there's some other updates to our election laws that increase access for people to register and to vote. So can you talk to us a little bit about those who are in jail? What provisions were made for those people who are in jail?
One of our speakers talked about the role of the county sheriff, which is to oversee the operation of the jails in Champaign County. Those who are in jail but not yet convicted of a crime are eligible to register and to vote. Always in the past, our sheriffs have made arrangements for people to register to vote. But starting this year, the sheriff can also establish a temporary polling place in the jail so that folks who are in the jail awaiting trial, not yet convicted, can not only register to vote, but can actually vote at the polling place.
Excellent.
So that's the change there for folks who might be in the jail.
Excellent. How about those with disabilities? Any changes there?
Please do tell your friends who may have both temporary or permanent disabilities and that make it difficult for them to go to the polls in person. What they can do is request what's called curbside voting. And normally this happens at the county clerk's office and at the Brookins Center, where election judges will actually come out to your car, bring your ballot to you, and you can vote right there in your car, turn in your ballot to the election judges, and be on your way. So if that's a concern for anyone you know, please have them contact the county clerk's office when we get closer to the primary election.
Excellent. And then what about high school students? I think that's been in place for a little bit. And so access for our high school students. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. In Illinois, even though registering to vote typically happens when you're 18, folks who are 17 years old by the primary and will also be 18 by the general election in November, can actually register to vote at age 17 and vote in the primary. So that applies to many of our high school seniors and some high school juniors. So that's always been true. But as of the new changes to the election code, all high schools in Illinois are required to provide voter registration information to high school students, and also to allow nonpartisan organizations to conduct voter registration on site. The League of Women Voters Youth Outreach Team is working with several local high schools where students are taking the role of being the lead in organizing voter registration at their high schools. So for those of you with high school students in your families, you might want to be alert for those opportunities later in the spring.
Excellent. I know Erin was one of those ambassadors at Uni High when she was there, and she
That's
continues
right,
that great work. Yeah, she continues that great work. So it's wonderful to have our young people involved in politics and making their voices be heard.
Absolutely.
Lastly, is there any other provision that was put in place for all voters, that made it easier to vote for all voters?
This won't be a change in Champaign County, because Champaign County was quite honestly out ahead of many places in Illinois. Some of you may have voted at what are called universal voting locations. Brookins Center, Parkland, the Leonard Center, Church of the Living God. By universal, that means that anybody from anywhere in the county can vote at those locations. It's quite a convenience for people who might live in one area but work in another. They can vote. They don't have to go to their home precinct or home polling place to vote. They can vote at one of these universal sites. Now in Illinois, every county is required to have at least one of those. Again, as Champaign County is out in front of that, I believe in the last election, we had 12, and there probably will be similar number this year.
Excellent. Well, I know there were a few, we've gone through our interview portion, and so I think there were a few slides that you wanted to share with people as well.
Let me do this really quickly for everybody, because I want to make sure that you have an idea of election resources. And I'm showing this on the slides, hopefully right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Please feel free to take a picture of this slide if you'd like, or these slides will also be posted on the Alpha Kappa Alpha website after our webinar. I've put in here the links to important voting resources for you. The Illinois Board of Elections, where you can change your voter registration or register to vote 24/7, which is always a good thing. And the Champaign County Clerk Elections Department for all of our county election information. And also that's where you can find your own personal voting information. It's called Your Voting Information section. And in there, you'll be able to find out your own districts, who you can vote for in the various county and state elections. So, and I've also put the phone number of the county clerk there. And two important sources of information going forward. Here's the League of Women Voters link to our website, which includes all kinds of information related to registration, voting, and candidates. And finally, as we get closer to the election and we know who the candidates will be on our primary ballot, I would suggest you might want to consider a very significant local nonpartisan website called votechampaign.org, which includes information on all candidates in contested races, what the candidates have to say about their own candidacy, and also information from other sources. So I hope that these sources become important for you, because they will have the information that you would need to help you be an informed voter and to be able to vote in all those important state and county races that we are going to encounter this year.
Well, thank you, Ann, for your time this evening. As always, you are very informative and you help us all stay abreast of changes in Illinois laws and what's going on. So I thank you for your time.
You're welcome. And I would like to thank the speakers we had tonight. All of
They were
you
phenomenal.
highlighted not only their particular reasons for believing that state and county elections are so important, but also for reminding us of the impact we can all have when we vote.
Yes. Well, yes, thank you to our youth and all of our speakers, because I think they highlighted some things that sometimes we don't think about. So we'll turn it back over to you, Ms. Dionne.
Thank you so much, ladies, for that wonderful Q&A. We have one question in the chat and the Q&A. We kind of touched on it, but I'm sure that the person, Miss Karen Fresco, would love to hear words of wisdom from you two phenomenal ladies. Can you comment on what the importance of voting in the primary is?
Sure. The only way that candidates appear on our general election ballot on November 8th this year, is to have the most ballots, or most votes in the primary. So if we don't vote in the primary, we're basically letting others choose for us who will be on our general election ballot in November. That's why it's important to vote in the primary, so that you can indicate your choice. It's kind of like voting in, it's kind of like in the Olympics, where you have preliminary races that lead to the final. The only way a racer gets in that final group is to win at this level. And that's exactly what happens in our primaries. So I know that some people are not happy that they have to choose the ballot of one political party or another. But as our video said, other people are going to be doing that. And we do have the ability to make that choice as well, and to help decide who's going to be on the general ballot for everyone in November.
And just to add to that a little bit, I've always, ever since I registered to vote, I've voted in primaries and general elections. To me, it's just a civic duty. As a citizen and someone who takes my opinion regarding social issues and regarding who runs our government and how they run it, I think I have an opinion on that. And so I have always voted primary and general. I can't think of one election that I did not participate in. And so for me, it's just a given. It's something that we do. And especially now that they've made it earlier, that you can vote, you can vote by mail, you can vote early. I mean, with all the different options, why not vote? Why not let your voice be heard? And so to me, it's just something that we're supposed to do. So that's kind of why I vote in the primaries.
Thank you so much, ladies. We appreciate your input. Participants, we are going to have one final poll to see what are ways you can influence the political landscape. We have some interesting answers here. So all of the above received 83%. Make sure you are registered to vote, extremely important. Discuss issues and candidates with families and friends, equally as important. Be active and voice your opinions and reasons. Make sure to vote, and if appropriate, take others with you, absolutely. All of the above is most definitely the correct response. Thank you so much for participating in all of our polls today. We had a great amount of participation this evening. We would also like to thank each and every one of you for spending time with us in the webinar and on Facebook Live. We know that you had lots of choices of places that you could be this evening, but we thank you for joining us. We want to give you a few updates so that you can stay in contact with us and stay aware of our future and upcoming webinars. Our next webinar will be on March 16th. We will talk about voter suppression legislations. On April 20th, we will talk about knowing the candidates. And on June 15th, we will talk about holding your elected officials accountable. We voted them in. Are they doing what they said they were going to do? All of our webinars will be at 6:30 p.m. and they will be via Zoom until further notice. Please follow our website, Facebook, and Instagram of AKA Epsilon Epsilon Omega. And like Ms. Preslin said, information, the slides that were shown this evening will be on our website, aka eeomega.org. Again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for the Q&A and the participation. Have a pleasant evening, everyone. And make sure you get out and vote.